The dig was in a wheat field about 40 minutes outside Anadarko, Oklahoma, and the farmer who owned it kept asking us when we'd be done because he wanted to plant something the next season. It was July 2021. The heat was the kind that sits on your shoulders and doesn't leave until you're in the shower that night. I was leading a small team out of a university I won't name, working a Wichita-affiliated site that had been surveyed and mostly ignored for about 30 years. We were pulling up a lot of ceramic. Nothing spectacular, cord-marked sherds, a few rims, the usual. Around day 9, one of the grad students, Priya, called me over to her unit. She'd hit something bigger than a sherd, looked like a mostly intact vessel, tipped on its side, the neck broken, but the body okay. I took over the excavation myself because I liked the tedious work and because I hadn't dug a full vessel out of context in maybe 2 years. I spent the rest of the afternoon on it. Bamboo tools, a small brush, a water bottle with a bent straw for humidity. The clay came off in these thin, papery flakes, and underneath was the surface of the pot, dark orange, tempered with what looked like crushed shell. There was a design on one side. I didn't see it at first because it was still under a skim of dirt, but as I worked, I could tell it was figural, not geometric, which by itself was interesting. Wichita ceramics from this period didn't usually go figural. I made a note to photograph it in situ before I lifted the vessel. The design was a face. I remember thinking that was odd but not shocking. Faces show up. Effigy pots exist. I kept cleaning. The light was going by then, and I was working under a portable lamp Priya had rigged up on a pole. Mosquitoes were bad. My knees hurt in a way I recognized from field seasons in my 30s. The face had a mouth that was slightly parted. That took me maybe an hour to expose. Then the nose. The nose is where I first felt something wrong, and I want to describe this accurately because I've thought about it a lot. The bridge of the nose on the figure was uneven. Not stylized uneven, not decorative. It went slightly to the left at a very specific point, about a third of the way down, and then straightened out again. I have a nose that does that. I broke it when I was 11 falling off a bike, and it healed with this exact deviation. I've looked at it in mirrors and phone cameras for 20-something years. I stopped cleaning for about a minute. Then I told myself I was tired and kept going. The cheekbones came next. Mine sit high and a little wide, and my mother used to say I had my grandmother's face, which was Choctaw on one side and I don't know what on the other. The face on the pot had those cheekbones, not similar cheekbones, the same asymmetry, the right one a hair higher than the left, which is something I only notice when I tie my hair back. I sat back on my heels and drank water and looked at the sky for a minute because the sky was normal. When I came back to it, I did the eyes. The eyes on the figure were closed, or nearly closed, which was a small relief. But the shape of the eye sockets and the space between them was mine. There's a term for the distance between the inner corners of your eyes, and mine is slightly wider than average. So was hers. I photographed everything. I did not tell Priya what I was looking at. I wrapped the vessel in tissue and foam and put it in a padded crate and drove it back to the field lab that night, instead of leaving it in the shed, which was against our own protocol, but I did it anyway. In the lab, under real light, I looked at the face for maybe 2 hours. I put my phone next to it, camera on, front facing. I held it there and looked back and forth. I did that thing where you kept expecting the resemblance to break down under closer scrutiny, the way most resemblances do. It didn't break down. It got worse. The mouth was mine when I'm concentrating. The carbon date came back at roughly 500 years, plus or minus 40. Consistent with the layer, consistent with the associated material. Nothing about the vessel was anomalous in any technical way. The clay was local. The temper was local. The firing was consistent with the period. Nothing intrusive, nothing modern. I sent it out for a second opinion without telling anyone on my team why. I framed it as a routine authenticity check, which is a thing we do sometimes when a piece is unusual. The lab confirmed the date and the manufacturer. They also, unprompted, sent back a note about the figural design, saying it was an interesting example and asking if I wanted to include it in a joint paper. I passed the pot to 2 colleagues in physical anthropology and asked them to look at the face and tell me what they saw. I didn't tell them what I was looking for. Both wrote back within a week. Both said basically the same thing in slightly different language. Human faces have a limited number of possible configurations. Coincidental resemblance across large populations is not only possible, it is expected. One of them attached a paper about facial recognition false positives to be helpful. I sat with that for a while. It's a good answer. It's the kind of answer I would give. I brought the pot home for a night, which I also should not have done. I set it on my kitchen counter and took a picture of my own face next to it on my phone. Same angle, same light, no filter. Then I sent that picture to a coworker I trust, a guy named Wes, who runs the ceramics lab and has known me for 8 years. I didn't caption it, I just sent it. He didn't reply for almost a day. When I saw him at the department the next afternoon, he waited until we were in the hallway alone before he pulled out his phone and opened the picture. He didn't hand it to me right away. He looked at it for a long time, longer than made sense. He zoomed in on the pot. He zoomed in on me. He zoomed out again. Then he said, "This could be anyone." He said it flat, not a question, not a joke. He handed me back my phone. I waited for him to say the other thing, the thing you say after that, if you actually believe it. Something like, "You know how faces are," or "My aunt looks like a Roman coin," or any of the small noises people make to close a topic. He didn't say any of it. He looked at me for another second, and I could see him choosing not to say what he was thinking, and then he said he had a meeting and walked down the hall. The pot is in a climate-controlled drawer in a collection I'm technically the steward of. I go look at it sometimes. I don't take pictures of it with my face anymore. I've thought about the two possibilities that are actually available. Either the resemblance is what my colleague said, a statistical thing, faces having limited real estate, and my brain is doing what brains do, or somebody 500 years ago made a pot with a face on it, and that face has the same broken nose and the same uneven cheekbones and the same eye spacing as mine, and there is no available explanation for that, except the one I don't want to say out loud. I keep waiting for someone to tell me, it isn't me. Wes had the chance. He picked his words, and he picked them carefully. He said it could be anyone. He didn't say it wasn't me. I've been selling houses in Henderson County for 11 years, and I've walked through maybe 2,000 basements. You learn to read them the way a mechanic reads an engine. The one on Deaver View Road in May 2019 is the only one I still think about. The listing came in on a Monday. 3-bedroom, 1.5 bath, back of the property sloping down toward a creek that runs into the French Broad, priced at $189, which was low. Comparable houses in that pocket, even the tired ones, were sitting at $240 or better. My broker forwarded it to me because the seller wanted it moved in under 30 days and was willing to negotiate. I called the number on the form. The owner picked up on the second ring. He said his name was Ray. He said his mother had lived in the house until March, that she'd moved into assisted living in Asheville, and he wanted the property sold before summer because he lived in Charlotte and couldn't keep driving out. His voice was flat but polite. He answered every question I asked without pausing to think, which some agents like, but I don't. People pause. It means they're being careful. The ones who don't pause are either bored or rehearsed. I had a client, Kevin, 31, a nurse anesthetist, who just accepted a job at Party. He was looking for something under $220 with land. I sent him the listing, and he asked for a showing that Saturday. We met at 10 in the morning. Ray was already there when we pulled in, standing next to a maroon F-150 in the driveway. He was maybe 60, thin, wearing jeans and a work shirt tucked in tight. He shook Kevin's hand first, then mine. His palm was dry. He said he'd give us the tour himself because the lockbox was still on order, which was odd, but not alarming. Owners do that sometimes when they're in a hurry. The house was clean. Too clean, maybe, for a place a 90-year-old woman had been living in until 8 weeks ago. No smell of anything, no dust on the baseboards. The carpets in the bedrooms looked freshly shampooed. Kevin was already in love with the price and the acreage, and I could tell he was walking around trying to talk himself into ignoring anything I might flag. Ray showed us the kitchen, the living room, the back deck, which had a nice view of the tree line. He talked about his mother's garden and pointed at where the tomato cages had been. He was pleasant. He kept his hands in his pockets a lot, Then we went to the basement. It was a walkout, half finished, with a laundry area on one side and an open concrete space on the other. Standard for that kind of house in that county. I've been in 50 like it. What caught me right away was the floor. There was a rectangle of concrete, maybe 6 by 9 feet, in the middle of the open area, and it was a different color than the rest. Not by a little. It was noticeably darker, the way new concrete is before it fully cures out. Kevin didn't notice at first. He was looking at the water heater. I walked over to the rectangle and crouched down. You could see the seam, clean and straight, where the old slab had been cut out and the new pour set in. The edges were smooth. Someone had taken time with it. "When was this done?" I said. Ray was on the stairs, halfway down. He came the rest of the way. "Oh, that. I had a guy come out in April. Mom always said the floor got cold in the winter. Figured before I sold the place I'd put some insulation under there. One favor she never got to enjoy." I nodded. I said something like, "Makes sense. But you don't insulate a basement floor that way. You put down foam board and a subfloor on top of the existing slab. You don't cut a hole in the concrete and re-pour it. And you sure don't do it in a house you're about to list, on a property where every dollar of unrecouped renovation is $1 off your margin." Kevin came over. He looked at the concrete. He looked at me. He asked Ray a couple of questions about the age of the house, the septic, the well. Ray answered all of them evenly, but he had shifted his weight. He was standing with one foot on the bottom step, like he was ready to go back up. Kevin's phone buzzed. He looked at it and said he had to take it. It was the hospital confirming his start date. He went up the stairs and out the sliding door onto the deck. I could see his outline through the glass, pacing. Ray and I were alone in the basement. He didn't move for maybe 5 seconds. Then he walked over to where I was standing, closer than he needed to be, and he spoke very quietly. Not a whisper, just quiet. "Get him to take the house. It's the best thing for everybody. You believe me." That was it. That was the whole sentence. He didn't smile when he said it. He wasn't threatening. His face was actually kind of tired, the way somebody looks when they've been carrying something for a long time and want to hand it off. I said, "I'll talk to him." I don't know why I said that. I think I just wanted to be back upstairs. Ray noted once and went to the laundry side of the basement and started fiddling with the dryer vent, giving me space. I climbed the stairs. My legs felt heavy on the way up, but I kept my face normal. Kevin was still on the deck. I waited by the kitchen counter until he came in. In the car, driving back toward town, Kevin said, "So what do you think?" I told him I didn't like it. I told him the concrete work in the basement didn't match the story, and that the price being that low with a rushed timeline was a pattern I'd learned to be careful around. I didn't tell him what Ray said to me. I still don't know why I held that back. Part of me thought it would sound crazy, and part of me thought if I said it out loud, Kevin would want to know how I answered. He passed on the house that afternoon. He found a place in Fletcher 2 weeks later. I sat with it for 3 days. Then, I called the sheriff's department in Hendersonville and asked to speak to somebody about a property concern. A deputy called me back. I told him the address, the timeline, the fresh pour, and the sentence Ray said to me in the basement. I said all of it plainly. I didn't editorialize. He was polite. He took notes. He said he'd look into it. 2 days later, he called back and said he'd driven out to the property, spoken to the owner, and found no basis for a search warrant. The owner had explained the concrete work the same way he'd explained it to me. There was no missing persons report attached to the address. There was no complaint from a neighbor. There was nothing. He said, and I remember his exact phrasing, "Ma'am, a man's allowed to pour concrete in his own basement." The house sold 3 weeks later to a couple from Ohio. It closed at 194. For the first year, I checked the Times News and the county sheriff's press releases about once a month, then every couple of months, then a few times a year. I'm still doing it, honestly. I look up the address. I look up his name. I check the arrest logs for that stretch of road. Nothing has ever come up. I don't know if that means I was wrong. I've thought about it a lot. Maybe he really did insulate the floor in the weirdest possible way. Maybe he was just a man in a hurry to be done with his mother's house. Maybe the sentence in the basement meant something ordinary and I'm the one who put weight on it. But I remember his face when he said it, and every time I drive past the turnoff for Deaverview Road on my way to a showing out that direction, I keep my eyes on the road. I've been doing HVAC work for almost 11 years, most of it in commercial buildings around Seattle. Malls, hotels, one hospital I try not to think about. So when I say what happened in February 2022 wasn't the weirdest thing I've dealt with on paper, understand? I mean on paper. In my head, it's still at the top of the list. The site was an underground retail complex downtown, 3 levels below street, connected to a couple of the bigger towers by pedestrian tunnels. I won't name it. If you know Seattle, you can probably guess. Old build, retrofitted maybe 4 times since the 80s, and the duct system down there is a nightmare in the technical sense. Some runs are galvanized steel from the original construction. Some are newer flex sections spliced in during a fire code overhaul. It looks like something a spider built while drunk. I was on a scheduled inspection, 3rd shift, solo. That's not unusual for the walkthroughs. A full crew comes in for actual repairs, but a check and log is a one-man job. You go in, you swing by the main plenum, you check pressure readings at maybe 15 or 20 points, you note anything that looks off, and you're out by 6. Most nights, the worst thing you deal with is a raccoon that got in somewhere it shouldn't have. I remember it was around 2 in the morning because I'd just finished a coffee from the thermos and I'd checked my watch to see how badly I was pacing myself. I was in a service corridor on sub-level 2, one of the older sections, walking a run of trunk duct maybe 4 feet across. Not big enough to crawl through comfortably, but big enough that sound travels down it like a pipe organ. The first time I heard it, I thought it was traffic. That whole area sits under a slope where 4th Avenue comes down toward the waterfront, and you get all kinds of weird bleed-through when trucks break up top. I've heard what sounds like whale song before, coming through the ducts, so the low murmuring didn't spook me at first. I kept walking, kept my flashlight on the joints, looking for any sag or moisture staining. 20 feet further in, it got clearer. It wasn't traffic. Traffic doesn't have consonants. I stopped and put my ear about 6 inches from the seam of the duct, the way you do when you're trying to figure out where a rattle is coming from. And I could hear voices, several of them. Not overlapping like a crowd, more like people taking turns. One would say something short, then another would say something short, then another. Monotone, no inflection, no rising or falling, just words, evenly spaced, going down a line, names. They were saying names. I want to be clear about this because I've thought about it a lot since. I wasn't hearing gibberish that my brain was pattern matching into names. They were names. English ones mostly. Kevin, Marissa, Daniel, Rebecca, something Slavic I couldn't quite catch. Andre, Tommy, one that sounded like Priya, and so on. A list, not shouted, not whispered scary, just recited, like someone reading a class roster in a room where nobody was supposed to answer. My first instinct was that some maintenance guy had left a radio in one of the mechanical rooms, and I was hearing a podcast leak through the return. That's happened before, but the more I listened, the less it sounded like it was coming through anything. It sounded like it was in the duct with me, like the voices were inside the metal, spaced along its length, and I was standing next to a section of them. I kept listening. I couldn't tell you why. Some part of my brain was still on the podcast theory, waiting for a laugh track or an ad break. The list kept going. It never sped up, it never slowed down. There were no pauses between speakers. It had the rhythm of something being read off a page by people who didn't care what was on the page. And then one of the voices said my name. I don't share it online, but it's not a common one, and there was no ambiguity. It was said exactly the way my mother says it, with the second syllable a little clipped. Same voice as the one that had said Kevin a minute earlier, so I don't think it was targeted, if that makes sense. It came out in sequence with the others. Then the list stopped. Not tapered off, stopped. Like someone lifted the needle off a record. I stood there in the corridor with my flashlight pointed at the duct seam, and I didn't move for probably 30 seconds. The ductwork went back to what ductwork sounds like when a building is asleep. Faint hum from a distant fan, a tick as some metal contracted somewhere, nothing else. I walked out. I didn't run. I walked, and I finished the loop back to the mechanical room the long way so I wouldn't have to pass that section again, and I sat in my truck in the parking garage for about an hour before I drove home. 2 nights later, I came back with a guy named Ellis from my crew. Told him I thought I had a fan bearing going bad in that run and wanted a second pair of ears. We walked the exact same stretch. He stood exactly where I'd stood. The building did what it always does. Ellis said, "I don't hear anything, man. You good?" I told him I must have been tired. I gave it a week. Then I went back alone. Same corridor. Later this time, closer to 3, and it was there again. Same rhythm, same evenness. Different names, mostly, but a couple I recognized from the first list. Kevin was in it again. So was Priya. The voices went down their roster, one at a time, and about 4 minutes in, they said my name, and the list stopped. I called an acoustic engineer that Friday, not through the company, out of my own pocket. Guy came out on a Sunday, spent about 6 hours in the tunnels with equipment I don't understand, and gave me his write-up on a Tuesday over coffee at a diner in Georgetown. His explanation was almost boring. The complex sits under a strip of the city with a lot of ground-level bars and restaurants, some of them right on top of the older duct runs. Certain temperature gradients in February, when the ground is cold and the exhaust from those kitchens is hot, create a condition where sound from the street-level couples into the duct stell and travels for surprising distances. The metal filters out most of the frequency range, and what you're left with is something that sounds like whispering. The names are just words. Any conversation about weekend plans, sports, whatever, has proper nouns in it, and the brain latches onto those because they're the only things that resolve out of the wash. I asked him about my name. He shrugged and said, "How many syllables? 2? You've probably heard your name 1,000 times tonight in this city without noticing. You noticed it there because you were listening for something." He's right. I know he's right. I've read his report twice. It even has a diagram. I asked my supervisor to move me to the North Zone the following Monday. He didn't ask why, and I didn't tell him. I still work for the same company. I still do underground sites. I just don't do that one. Kevin, if you're out there, I hope your list is shorter than mine.